Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry.
And I'm Irene.
We're out in the greenhouse today. We've had a number of questions over several months about how we built this and how strong it is and how it holds up and a lot of other things. So we're going to take you on a little tour.
The whole structure is made out of components for chain link fence. These are the top rails, and these are the posts that you would normally use for chain link fence. So we're talking sturdy metal. If you were to have some sort of a major disaster, like getting hit by a real tornado or something, these are easily replaceable parts. So it wouldn't be trying to contact some random company that imported something from someplace, and then you have to try and get replacement parts. We also like the idea that we could decide how big our greenhouse was going to be. We actually sat here and paced things out and tried to figure out what was the size we needed. Did we want a small one? Did we, you could just do a tiny little greenhouse if you wanted that was just, from here to here, 2 bays. Or you could make it bigger than this. There are some professionally made greenhouses that are using the same exact system, and it works great. It works great.
Constructing this greenhouse was pretty straightforward. It just took a little bit of time. First, the ribs went in place. Second, the ridge pole went along the top of the greenhouse. And then I started putting in all of these other things. This baseboard down here is pressure treated lumber. I don't like pressure treated lumber, but it's going to be in contact with the ground here. We have all manner of things that can happen. We do get termites here, so using this pressure treated helps keep the termites away. Now you can't get a 40-foot long piece of wood. So each of the pieces of wood are joined together by a couple of straps to hold it in place. Not all screws are good to put into pressure treated wood, so just make sure if you do this that you use the right kind of screw. The hip boards are likewise made from pieces of 1x4 that's about 3/4 of an inch thick. I splice them together using other small pieces of wood, also 1x4, that's joined together both with wood glue and stainless steel screws. Now, stainless steel screws are used most places in this greenhouse so that they don't rust. I worked in greenhouses when I was very young, at least I worked some, and I know that they get a lot of moisture in them. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't putting any fasteners in here that were going to die right away. Now you'll notice this gray colored conduit up here. This is for electricity. The entire greenhouse is wired for normal 120 volts. That means we can run a fan, an ordinary fan that's inexpensive. I don't have to have a very expensive one. And if it rusts or gets damaged by water, I just replace it. You may have seen us install this insulation some time ago. This is 1.5 inch thick insulation board. They're cut about 2 inches wide because that's the distance between the hip board and the baseboard. It's not exactly consistent over the entire length of the greenhouse because we're not level. Remember when I showed you outside that there's about a 6-inch drop from one end of the greenhouse to the other? Well, there's also some unevenness of the ground. Oh, and by the way, pressure treated lumber warps. And so some of this lumber has already warped. That means that there's not as much space, and sometimes there's more space, between the baseboard and the hip board. Now, all of the outlets that are in this greenhouse are weather-tight outlets. There's a gasket, there's a spring-loaded door. Again, this is something that you want to be cautious of when you're wiring a greenhouse for electricity. All of our electricity in here is run with a ground wire so that there's no ungrounded sockets anywhere in the greenhouse. Now the lights that we have overhead are 120 volt LED lamps. We can turn on the lights with a water resistant, waterproof light switch. Again, I don't want to have anything that's going to allow me to make a connection between 120 volts and the ground. I want to make sure there's another path. Now I used metal EMT, that's metal conduit, that's 1/2 inch, for the wiring that connects the lights. And that's the kind that I needed to use. Unfortunately, my bending wasn't the best to go from the junction box to the lights, but it works. We live off grid. We have to generate our own electricity, which means I try to minimize the amount of electrical usage everywhere on the homestead. This is a really nice product right up here. This is a passive solar window opener. This tube right here has wax in it, and that wax is a very specific melting temperature. So when the black tube heats up, the wax starts expanding and it will open the window. In fact, the window down here is already starting to open. Now the other end of the greenhouse, I took that mechanism off completely because it's in the sun, it warms up before the temperature in the greenhouse is actually warm enough in the wintertime, and it lets all the cold air in. So we've changed things up a little bit for the wintertime. The very important thing, the coat hook. You know, when you come out and work in the greenhouse, especially like today actually, I've already had to take my jacket off because it's starting to get warm in here. In the summertime, frequently when Irene comes out, she'll come out with a sweater or something else on like that, and as the greenhouse warms up, she'll want to take that off. Well, you get water and all manner of stuff here, you want to hang it up. There's the hook. It's convenient when you come in, it's convenient when you leave. Now we're at the south end of the greenhouse. We have another wall here, but you'll notice it has clear plastic on most of the wall. The only part that isn't plastic is where this door used to be.
Well, the door is still there. We're just not using it as a door anymore.
Yeah, it's no longer a functional door. I've closed it all off because we needed to have more air movement and cooling in this greenhouse in the late spring, summer, and definitely late summer. It gets really, really hot in here. We were able to keep the greenhouse down to between 95 and 100 degrees most of the summer this past year. There were some days when it got over 100 degrees, but that happens. Most of our plants fared very well with those temperature swings. We had one variety of tomato that we're not sure what happened. We're still investigating, trying to figure out what actually went wrong. We'll figure that out. But it's ironic, our open pollinators just did fabulously in the heat. So we're pretty happy with that. Now this is a combination of fan and swamp cooler. On the outside of this now inoperable door is a large thing that holds the water and the mat that has the water run through it to cool down the air. We can set the fan to 3 different speeds with or without water. Without water, it's just air blowing from the outside coming in. With water, it runs as a swamp cooler. So that's really great.
For people who live in colder damper climates, a swamp cooler is an evaporative cooler. They commonly use what they call a water wall in some of the big greenhouses.
We have a thermostat to control turning on and off the fans. I have a very small fan up top. That's intended to move air from the outside when it's really hot and we're not running the swamp cooler, but we are running the fan. Let's talk a little bit about why this greenhouse is faced north-south instead of east-west. Conventional wisdom for a greenhouse says you should always site your greenhouse going east-west because that provides the most sun that you can get within the grow space. Well, remember that we live off-grid, and I did say that I try to minimize the amount of electricity that we have to use to run our greenhouse. Well, it turns out that the prevailing wind is coming from south of us, more or less. It's really kind of the southwest, and it blows north most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the time. What that means is we get some natural cooling ability just relying on the prevailing wind. Now sometimes in this summertime, the prevailing wind is really ripping. We've had 35, 40 mile an hour winds going on a pretty regular basis. We've also had 50 mile an hour sustained winds, which are pretty high. In fact, this structure has stood up through all of those kinds of winds. Our really big dust devils, which, by the way, will pick up some of our metal chairs outside and blow them across the yard. So it's a pretty strong amount of wind. Now we have purlins in the greenhouse. It's not so much for structural integrity, it's mostly so that we have a place to run strings to hold up plants. Well, we will use them for structural integrity too, but the primary purpose again is to be able to trellis our plants up. Now, on the east side of the greenhouse, which is over here, we have a purlin that runs the full length of the greenhouse. On the west side, we're run 1, 2, 3, 4. We're about halfway. I ran out of top rails, so I need to go buy some more, which means I have to get the back of the truck cleaned out so I have a place to put those top rails. Well, I hope that provided some information about our greenhouse, how it's working, how we put it together. We have some pictures that we'll be showing. When I first started building it, I wasn't thinking about videos, I wasn't thinking about pictures. All I was thinking about was building a greenhouse. I was dealing with a lot of issues going on from the car accident, and this was enough.
Right, I took a couple of stills of the greenhouse without anything on it, and then we basically went straight from there to I have a picture of it when it's up.
The two of us used a couple of tennis balls and a couple of ropes to pull this plastic over the top of the greenhouse.
Right.
We get up really early and work before the sun came up, which is when the wind starts coming up. Got the plastic over, got it secured with some wiggle wire, just barely.
Right. Well, we have 2 times in the day when we can pretty much guarantee that there won't be wind. One is early in the morning and one is at dusk. Well, the problem with dusk is the sun's going to go down.
It's dusk.
And if we had any problems, we didn't want to be working with flashlights in the dark, which just didn't sound like any fun at all. So, yeah.
We actually put the plastic on this greenhouse, I think in February of 2018.
I think I actually have pictures in December. So pictures don't lie.
We put the plastic on sometime.
During the winter. I mean, it was kind of frustrating because we had really hoped to have this done so that we could use it during the summer. And that's when we started learning the realities. And we're not the only homesteaders who've learned the realities of greenhouses. When it's hot, it's too hot. And when it's cold, it's too cold. So you have to learn to moderate.
Well, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications because we're going to be doing some more stuff here.
Right. And if you have any questions about the details of how this was built, please let us know and we'll try to answer them. We're going to see if we can find the original links that we used for some of the articles online on how to build these kind of greenhouses. Found a couple of very complete ones that talked about not just the construction but also the actual growing that you can do. And that's one of the things that I would actually recommend people go to Johnny's. I get nothing from Johnny's, but I tell you what, they provide a huge number of articles on practical things like moderating temperatures, what you should grow, what you shouldn't grow, all that kind of stuff.
Now, I had some experience in glassed-in greenhouses, but that was heated with a steam system running off fuel oil. That was a long, long time ago, and this is completely different. Well, thanks very much for watching. Take care of yourselves. We'll talk with you on the next one. Talk to you later.
Bye.